The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Oh. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to I think the seventh day of Commitmas, if I'm doing my math right. Tonight we're talking forking repositories and pull requests with Matt Oswalt at Mirrodin. And if you're interested in getting in on the conversation, you can follow at Commitmas or at vBrownbag. If you want to ask questions during the show, feel free to hashtag Commitmas or hashtag vBrownbag, and I'll try to pick it up and ask our gracious host. You can also ask questions if you are in the GoToMeeting webinar as well. Let's see, recorded meetings can be found at bit.ly/commitmas2, and you can go to our GitHub repo on github/commitmas/30 days of Commitmas 2015. And with that, I am going to pass this over to Matt Oswalt.
Alrighty, let me see if I can show the right screen here. So I have two screens. Which one can you see?
We have a black screen, command line.
Still?
Yes.
Let me try again.
Same thing.
Interesting. Let me see if the other screen will work. How about now?
Nope, same fat admin.
Wow. Oh. So you see the terminal?
Yeah, sorry, command line. Yeah, fat admin.
Oh, gotcha. Okay,
sorry,
so let me sorry, no, my misunderstanding. Let me switch back to the screen that I'd like to use and see if I can drag that over. So do you see the terminal now?
Yep, it's there.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that.
No, my bad.
Okay, how is everybody? Let's see. I don't have slides. I'm not a huge slide person. I've been using slides decreasingly, so I figure we can make this just as interactive as possible. But I do have a few things that I'd like to talk about conceptually so that we can get started. Before I do want to talk about the fork and pull model that we're talking about today. When it comes to contributing to open source projects on GitHub, GitHub actually employs a reasonably unique mechanism for contributing code. And I say this because, for me personally, I am used to other methods, or at least I was before I started using GitHub. Large projects such as OpenStack or OpenDaylight, there are a few others that use this. They use different platforms like Gerrit, which has a pretty unique contribution model. So if you're somebody that's looking to contribute to an open source project, they have sort of their own Git workflow around doing that. There are certain ways that you would use your local Git client to make that happen. And I know actually several developers who have never used GitHub whatsoever, and moving to the GitHub model is a learning curve because of that uniqueness. Now, there are several other products, like I know GitLab is out there. There's also one from Atlassian, Bitbucket. I know they all have similar models around GitHub because this is sort of a model that's been working for a lot of people for several years now. But nevertheless, there's still a diverse workflow. Git itself is different from GitHub in that Git does not impose that workflow. It's almost just a protocol definition with some software wrapped around it, if you really think about it. GitHub is a platform that imposes some sort of opinionated workflow on how you contribute code. And GitHub's opinion on that is the pull request. The pull request is the way you contribute code to an open source repository. Most of the time. I would say more times than not. So if I could reduce pull requests down to a really simple definition, let's just say, you have this project. We're going to call this project Fat Gopher / Mega Awesome. Fat Gopher being the organization that owns this project, Mega Awesome being the project name. A pull request is basically a way of saying, hey, Mega Awesome, I have something that I think you'll like. please consider pulling it into your repository. Now, this is very different from the traditional push model that I talked about in other platforms. And if you've already used GitHub for yourself, you may already be doing this push model yourself. You may have a single repository that you use to track some of your source code, and you simply want to store it in GitHub to take advantage of the GUI and some of the advanced features that GitHub specifically offers. And that's great. The problem with, or not the problem, but sort of the limitation of that is it's sort of intended for a single user methodology. Like I have several repos that fit this description, where I have a repository that tracks, for instance, my dot files on my Mac. You know, I don't expect anybody to contribute to that. They could if they wanted to, but I primarily just simply use that as a public record of what I use to configure my Mac, so that other people can see that. And for me, the push model works just fine. I'm the only person working on that repository, so there's no need to make it any more complicated than it is. However, this particular repository that we see on our screens is different in the sense that this is not just a single user project. This isn't just something that somebody's pushed up so that other people can see it. This is intended to be a point of collaboration between multiple developers, sometimes hundreds or thousands of developers. So a better model is needed, something that provides, you know, good collaboration tools. There's also the need to make sure that conflicts are handled and merged appropriately. There's a number of other features that the pull request model provides you, and we're going to look at a lot of these in detail soon. So in summary, this fork and pull request model is by far the most common way to contribute to a project on GitHub. Just to recap some of the advantages over the simple push model, it allows you to make changes in your own fork without bothering anybody else. What this allows you to do, and this is something that I harp on often, because you can make changes in your own fork, it's sort of like your own little sandbox. And that encourages the idea of committing early and often, which is a good thing. I don't like it when I see projects that have huge commits, you know, like there's like a lot of code in a single commit, because that tells me several things. First off, that person may be rolling the dice with respect to some of the changes they're making. If they're not committing early and often, they can't roll back to a certain point in time. They sort of roll back all the way to the beginning of those huge changes, or they sort of push through it. Committing early and often is a way of mitigating that risk. If something goes wrong, you can roll it back in smaller chunks instead of a huge chunk. In addition to that, it helps because it allows other developers to see what changes you're making more often. Instead of waiting for 2 weeks for you to make that one big commit, they can see a commit per day and see where you're going, so that other people that are contributing can actually sort of figure out where you're going with your ideas and sort of meet you there. It's a very common way of doing things, especially on GitHub. So pull requests are great because they encourage this really, really healthy behavior. And then finally, a pull request provides a sort of central place for collaboration. This could be additional patches, so you might provide a pull request with a single commit, and somebody might comment on that pull request saying, hey, this is missing, you should add it. Well, you can actually add the commit to that same branch, and it'll show up as a sort of conversation item, as if you were chatting that commit to the person, and it just shows up automatically. So that's super useful for collaboration. In addition, you can also centralize the reference of issues. So if you open up a GitHub issue, you can point the issue to the pull request. So if an issue was open saying, hey, we have a bug, and you submitted a pull request that says, hey, I have a solution for that bug, you can actually reference that pull request in the issue, and both will reference each other sort of automatically. I'll show you that here in action very shortly. So that's super cool. Basically, a pull request is a really cool place to do, really useful place to do collaboration on contributions. Okay, before we get to some of the specifics and, more importantly, the demo, I wanted to first overview some miscellaneous things. First off, GitHub has some very useful built-in tooling around URLs. We'll see this in action here when I go to the demo, but you'll notice that I'm just sort of copying and pasting in GitHub URLs to various things like issues and pull requests and even commit messages. GitHub will automatically parse these URLs and do some fancy-dancy magic with it, which is super, super cool. So keep an eye out for that when I go to the demo. I'm going to paste in some URLs, and then I'll show you where those show up. GitHub's done a lot of really cool tooling around that. The other thing is, if you're familiar with Git amends, or rather commit amends, if you've done that, if you've modified a previous commit, be very, very careful with commit amends in the pull request model. If you've worked with Gerrit, which is another totally different type of Git remote, you'll notice that Git amends are actually encouraged because that's sort of fundamental to the way that you submit patch sets in Gerrit. But with pull requests, it's a different model. You're not supposed to amend changes, especially if they've been pushed. If you amend a commit that hasn't been pushed, that's really not a big deal. But if you amend a commit that has been pushed, it's possible that other people will be making commits against the first version of that change. And if you amend that commit, you'll break a lot of other people's changes. So just be careful with that. Okay, so those are the two warnings, or two sort of miscellaneous items. Let's look at sort of from the ground up. Let's say we want to contribute to this project. We've identified something that we want to do on this project. How do you even start? You sort of just found this thing on the internet. It looks cool. It looks like something you want to cut your teeth on in the form of a contribution, which I highly encourage. That's one of the best ways for me personally to learn, just because I'm such a hands-on person. I require that sort of contribution, and it helps me really, really learn. So that's great, but where do we even get started? What is the first thing that we should do, assuming a blank slate? Well, the first thing I would recommend is, this project in particular doesn't have it, just because I didn't add it, but more times than not, something along the lines of a contribution document will be present in either the repo or the website for the project. I'll point you to Docker just as an example. In Docker, they have a markdown file called contributing.md. This is a pretty common way of doing this on GitHub. You might also see some projects prefer to do this in a wiki. For instance, OpenStack. OpenStack is composed of many projects, and though many of the repositories do have sort of a contributions or a hacking, I think it's called, file, there's also sort of a centralized hacking page on their wiki. So it might not be found in the same place, but basically, if there's a project out there that you want to contribute to, look for something like this, because most of the complexity associated with contributing to a project is in these kind of rules. The pull request mechanism that GitHub provides actually is not that complicated when you get down to it. I think the thing that scares people away a lot more times than not is that they don't know what the community around the project is expecting. Because it's not just simply clicking the buttons. There are certain things that you need to put in your pull request or in your issue. Whatever you're contributing to the project, there may be rules around the content, not just the process that GitHub imposes. So I highly recommend that you look through or look for something like this. Obviously, Docker has done a fantastic job of making sure that everything that you might want to contribute, whether it's documentation, bug fixes, pull requests, everything is documented in this document. So if this doesn't exist, I would recommend going through some other mechanisms, like, for instance, IRC or Slack. You can open an issue for the project saying, hey, I want to contribute, blah. How do I go about that? Or maybe what are the rules that I should follow? Because, again, the idea of a pull request is, I think I have a good idea for your project. I would like it if you could consider pulling it in. That pulling in method sort of makes you a salesperson for your change. It's your job to make sure that you're conforming to the rules of the project. And so it really makes the project maintainers feel warm and fuzzy if a new contributor or a new potential contributor is asking these kind of questions up front. Not just how can I contribute, but how can I contribute the right way? How can I contribute the way that you think this project should operate? That really means a lot to a project maintainer. Okay. That is sort of how to get started on sort of just understanding the process for doing things in a project. If you'll go back to this project, this is what we are going to contribute to. And this is at the point where I'm intending to go into a demo, so I will pause for questions.
Looks like we're good right now.
Okay, cool. Just want to make sure.
Awesome.
So, the Mega Awesome project. It means nothing. I put this together for a blog post, actually, not too long ago. But it's just a Python project, really. So there's no need to reinvent the wheel. I cloned this into my an organization that I have set up. Fat Gopher is the name of the organization. So we're going to be using this project to basically we think the Mega Awesome project is mega awesome, and we want to contribute to it in some way. So what we do is we scan the repository and figure out what kind of things might this project need. Now, this is a pretty simplistic way of looking at it. Like I said, you may read the mailing list or keep up to date with IRC or Slack. Another thing is a lot of projects use Trello. So when you're opening up a question on one of these mediums, if you really want to know like what is next for the project, so you can help with what they're planning on working on, definitely ask if they have something like Trello, because that's a great way of identifying features that they need to add, or better yet, issues that they have open. You can go to the Issues tab. There's no issues open right now, but we will open one soon. So there are some ways around GitHub, and then others that some projects like to maintain that roadmap. So I would definitely check that out. But I actually have an issue that I would like to contribute to, and I don't need to look at any of those mechanisms, because I've noticed that the badge here that indicates the Travis CI build, I have a Travis CI configuration that is building this project, running things like static code analysis, so PEP 8 compliance specifically, because this is a Python project, we want to make sure that it conforms to PEP 8. And that build is failing. So we can click into this and go over to Travis CI. Looks like the PEP 8 task is failing. And if I click on that, I can actually look at the detailed output of what's going on here. Sorry if this is too small. I don't think I can zoom this in. I'll just read it briefly. Basically, there's an output for Pylint, which is a static code analysis tool for Python. And it's telling us that there's an undefined variable NA. Well, I have actually run into this problem before, and I know that this actually isn't an undefined variable issue. This is actually an issue with one of the dependencies. We are actually using a static version of Pylint, and one of Pylint's dependencies was updated recently and is causing this error. So basically, this is an aesthetic issue. This error, this undefined variable, which the PEP 8 tool is throwing, isn't actually there. It's a bug. So I know the fix, and the fix is to add a specific line to the dependency text file. If we go down here to test-requirements, you'll see that there's a list of requirements for running our tests. And I know that in order to fix this issue, I need to add the asteroid library, and I need to pin it at a very specific version that I know works. But of course, this is not my project, so I need to go through all of the methods that I just talked about to make sure that it's done properly. I would go down and say, go to the contributing.markdown file, make sure that I'm following the rules. I might check out the issues to see if this isn't an outstanding issue, or actually I would open the existing pull requests. I would make sure that this change isn't actively being worked on. If I don't find any of those things there, at the very least, I would open a message to the project maintainers, whether it's an IRC message, Slack message, or a mailing list email, and just say, hey, I intend to fix this. What is going on here? So let's do that. A really easy way to do this is just to simply open an issue. So I'm going to say, hey, build is failing. I can fix. I think we need to add the asteroid version 1.3.8 to the test requirements.txt file. This will make the build pass. Submit new issue. So I haven't changed anything in the code. What I've done is I've said, I don't want to just blindside the project maintainers with a new pull request, because I don't know if a pull request is needed. Not really. I mean, there could be branches behind the scenes. This is master here. This is the current sort of head of the project. But there could be a branch behind the scenes that we haven't looked at yet that may have a fix in progress, or rather, we might have a pull request as well, or an issue was already open where somebody else said, hey, I'm willing to work on this. It wouldn't make a lot of sense to go work on it yourself without at least doing the due diligence to figure that out. So that's why we've opened the issue here. We've changed nothing in the code. We haven't wasted our time working on this. We've just simply opened an issue saying, hey, I've identified this problem, and typically when you do that, you're saying that I'm also willing to fix it. At least that's the idea. Not to say that there aren't plenty of people that open issues saying, hey, this is wrong, please fix it for me. Obviously, there's tons of that. But this is the right thing to do. When you open an issue, you should be willing to make the fix, or at least ask questions that are oriented in helping you understand what it takes to make the fix. Just a few things over here. This is typically not something that an issue opener will do. A lot of times the project maintainers will work with this. So we, as the contributor, won't touch it. All we want to do is make sure that the information that we need for this is contained in here. Now, like I said, this is a very simple issue. There are plenty of additional things that, if you were doing this in Docker, there are plenty of additional things that you would need to provide in an issue. So please, 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 please follow those rules. But because there are no rules in this project, I'm just saving some time by simply adding the library and the version that we need to add, and that will provide our admin with enough info. So I am now going to switch to another browser where I am logged in as the maintainer of the Mega Awesome project, Fat Gopher, or rather Fat Admin is my name. So I'm logged in as Fat Admin, and I'm going to go to the Issues tab. Oh, it looks like there's a new issue. Cool. Somebody has seen that the build is failing and is willing to fix. Interesting. So they need to add the Asteroid version 1.3.8 to the test requirements.txt file. This will make the build pass. Okay. Mirden. Looks like you just volunteered yourself. Feel free to open APR. I won't be a total jerk. I'm a very benevolent leader. Okay, comment. So this is just a conversation. Now, of course, I am the project maintainer logged in as Fat Admin, so I'm actually going to say, I'm going to assign this to Mirden, and I'll even add a label that says this is an enhancement. There's probably another label needed, but for the sake of argument, we'll just use that one. It's worth noting that you'll very rarely see these vanilla GitHub labels. These are sort of like the regular labels that GitHub puts in there. Most of the time, a project will have their own very specific labels associated with sort of milestone, roadmap, things like that. And you'll also see milestones here. We don't have any milestones, but you'll see those there. Again, those are typically not for you to touch as the issue opener. Your job is to make sure that the issue contains the information it needs, and everybody else that maintains the project will take care of all of this metadata. Okay, so the issue is open, and we've received acknowledgement from a project maintainer that no one else is working on this. So now it is time to write some code, because then we know that we wouldn't be wasting our time by working on it. So let's go back to Chrome where I'm logged in as me. I'm going to go back to the repo, and forking, again, is a very simple mechanism. It just requires a button click or two, depending on how many organizations you have. The act of forking is really simple. I want to take a snapshot of this repository as it stands right now. And that repository, that snapshot, will not be updated automatically. So that's what I mean by a snapshot. I'm literally saying, as the project stands right now, I want to take a snapshot of it. And of course, I can fork it to my own profile. And now you can see that I have an icon here that indicates this is a fork, and it even says what it's been forked from. However, this is a separate repository. If there are updates to the main repository, Fat Gopher Mega Awesome, then I don't automatically receive those updates. It will let me know here where it will say the Fat Gopher master it is 1 commit ahead or 2 commits ahead, but it won't automatically put them in my repository. That's a really good way of making sure that you're working against a single version, essentially, of the repository. Okay, so my recommendation is before you do anything, you should fork first. Even if you're not intending to contribute, it's always useful to have the option of doing a push so that you can have those changes stored in the remote, in this case GitHub. Now, if you don't do the fork, you'll attempt to do that push, and more likely than not, that push will be rejected because you don't have permissions. So I always recommend that you fork first no matter what, because then you at least have the option. The next thing after forking is we want to clone this down to our local file system. Now, I'm sure you've looked at this in the previous commitments, so I'm going to skip past sort of like the minutia of what's actually going on here. But I'm assuming that the SSH keys have been set up correctly. You should be using SSH when doing a clone. I'm going to go to the terminal now, and I'm going to go to my code directory, which I'm already in, and I'm going to do a git clone. Mega awesome.git. And there we go. I've cloned locally. Now, that's pretty simple. If we do a git, cd mega awesome git status, and so yeah, nothing's changed. Sorry, I actually wanted to do git remote. So that looks like our remote for this particular repository is correct. megaawesome.git. That's correct. Okay, and then what I wanted to illustrate is I have a virtual machine that I perform builds in for this repo, and I've actually already cloned that into a different directory so that I could get that VM started ahead of the demo. So I'm actually going to go out of this into Python, and then I'm going to go into the Mega Awesome folder here. It is the exact same repository. As you can see, it's set up exactly the same way. I just happened to do it ahead of time so that I could get that virtual machine running. So let's see. So I've already opened the issue, and now what I need to do is let's do something interesting here. Let's actually go into the VM. Let's reset the development environment. I usually like to copy in the directory once so that I don't run over the network share. And then I just simply run the pep8 test because I want to make sure that I can replicate the issue locally. That way I know if I fixed it.
The awkward pause during all demos.
Yeah. Any questions?
Nope, not yet. No, you're doing an awesome job. Thanks.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so we've been able to replicate our issue. Again, I didn't have to do this, but I usually like to recommend it because, again, whenever you're making a change, you really need to know that your change was meaningful. And one of the ways of doing that is to benchmark the problem. And by reproducing the problem locally, we now know where to apply the fixes, and once we've applied those fixes, we know if we've actually fixed them. So this saves us from actually opening a PR and making other people aware of our changes prematurely. So I actually wanted to go out here. So this is in my just build VM. I usually copy stuff like one direction into the VM so that I can do the build, but the code itself is actually out here on my laptop. So I'm going to go into Sublime Text. So if I go to, where did I go? Test requirements.txt. So again, we know because we've experienced this issue before that we just need to add asteroid 1.3.8, and what that will do is it'll pin that version of asteroid on that particular version. Again, don't worry about the minutia of this. This is a very Python-specific thing. It's not part of the exercise. But again, because I've experienced this myself, I know the fix, and I'm just contributing that knowledge to the project. It's a simple fix. It's a simple change, so it's great for an example. So the change has been made, and again, we don't want to do anything until we know that we fixed the problem. So let's rerun this, re-import into the virtual machine, and then rerun the pep8 checks. And it looks like it works now. So yeah, it actually wasn't a pep8 issue because we didn't actually change any code. If it was a pep8 issue, then we probably would have had to fix some code. But because it was a bug, all we had to do was update the dependencies and make sure that the versions of the software that we wanted to use were being used. So that's great. So the fix is there. If we do a git status out here on our VM, you'll notice that the change is there. Test requirements is being updated. It looks like the new line is there. So that's great. So let's do a git add test requirements.txt, git commit -s for sign off. I highly recommend that you do this because it's just good. It's a good way of making sure that your changes are documented well. And plus, it's required by a lot of projects, so it's just a good habit to get into. We can do the message in line, just saying added asteroid. Actually, no, let's not do that. Let's add the commit message in the editor. So to do that, it's brought up. Now this is where I want to illustrate the URL parsing because it's super cool. So I have this open. I haven't made the save to the commit yet. What I want to do is I want to go into the Fat Gopher Mega Awesome repository. I want to go into the issues. and I want to copy this URL. And I'm going to put that URL in here. Updated test requirements with new Asteroid version. This addresses the problem brought up by issue, and then the URL. Save. And now the commit is there. And we can see that it's there. Oops, not long. Git log. There we go. Updated test requirements with new Asteroid version. Perfect. So now we want to do a git push origin. Actually, let me add something real quick. Oh, I'll add it later. So we have our origin. Origin is again our fork. We don't have a remote set up for the upstream repo, meaning the non-forked version. We want to push directly to the fork. So let's do a git push origin and the master branch. Okay. So now, if we go into the issue, just hit a quick refresh. Sometimes it auto-updates, sometimes it doesn't. You'll see that there's a new conversation item, and I didn't say anything. Nobody said anything. This is all automatically done because the URL was in the commit message, which is super, super cool. So what this does is it allows the other people, and again, I'm the one that contributes, but I'm also logged in as the administrator of the project. That person, he or she, can log in and say, oh, it looks like they actually added the change. So that's really cool. So now I'm expecting that a pull request is going to be opened because now the fork is different from the upstream. If we log into that, you'll see that where did I go? There we go. I had to refresh. Sorry about that. So yeah, this branch is one commit of fat gopher master. So what this allows us to do is open a pull request right from here. Now you can always open a pull request directly on the upstream project if you wanted to. You would just have to make sure that these drop-downs are set accordingly. By going in from the fork, these get set for you, which is really convenient. So yeah, just create pull request. Now this is a pretty safe thing to do because it doesn't actually merge anything, it just opens the pull request. As long as you, again, as long as you know that the fix that you've applied will actually fix the problem, you've done your due diligence. So create the pull request. And there we go. Now, of course, I mentioned that I have Travis CI integration built, so what Travis CI is doing is it's actually going through exactly the same tests that I just ran inside my virtual machine, namely running talks, the PEP8 checks. Before, those builds were failing because the new Asteroid version, or rather the old Asteroid version, wasn't pinned statically. So it was using a new version of that library, and that library was breaking these tests. So we wanted to make sure that that fix actually fixed things. And Travis CI is, of course, the authority on that because that's what we're using for our continuous integration system. Let's just click on the details while we're waiting because this does take a little bit of time. Yeah, it looks like these are all running. The good news is they all run sort of in parallel, which is nice. On our VM, they run in sequence. Yeah, it's installing the dependencies. This is the long part. It has to download all of those libraries that we listed in our text files. Any questions up until this point? This is a good time to ask them.
So far, so good.
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
I think it's a good thing. You've been pretty, it's been pretty consumable.
That's good. Good. Oh, looks like we've got some passes. That's promising. This one's still lingering. Interesting. I'll give it a little more time. Oh, we made some progress, so it should finish pretty soon. Again, that install dev step is the worst. There we go. And it passes. That's great. So let's go back to our project. Let's just refresh. All checks have passed. That's fantastic. This is a great thing to see. Conversely, seeing the build fail is the worst thing to see. If you've done this on a project, don't worry about it. That's why continuous integration exists. You won't cause well, you probably won't cause problems if the CI system is built correctly. So if you see the build failed and you've done your due diligence, you've done what the project told you to do, don't feel bad about this. I have a story that I can tell very quickly. When I was contributing to an open source project, it was using Garrett, which again used the whole patch set model, and I kept failing the build because I didn't really know how the unit tests were really being run that I was pushing into the code, and I contributed 10 times in a row, all failing the build. So if you have a build failure, don't get down on yourself. It's just a learning experience. But for us, it's really, really great because our build passes, which indicates that the fix that we intended on applying has actually worked. And so naturally, the administrator of the project is going to log in, see the pull request, and it's going to say, hey, looks like you've added the line, like you said you did, and it looks like that change resulted in the build passing. So I, as the authority on the project, I'm going to merge this pull request. Again, a pull request is I want to take changes in my repository here, and I want you to merge them into this. That pull model means that the person that is doing the pulling has the power. You are simply proposing a change. That person can reject or accept that change depending on whatever they feel like using as their influence. In this case, the administrator says, hey, I'm looking at this change myself, my eyeballs. I can see that this change is meaningful and that it does something useful. And I can also see that it satisfies our CI system. Because of those two things, I am merging this into our project. And also, because I know that this issue is open, I'm going to say this has been fixed. And what I'm even going to go a step further and show you some more parsing magic. This is the commit. If you look at the commit URL, you'll see that this is the commit that updated the project. I'm going to go back here and I'm going to say this has been fixed in URL. And as you can see, GitHub parses that automatically and makes it really pretty for us. I don't know, I just geek out about that kind of stuff. It's really cool. Okay. The next thing, this is the last thing before I have a hard mode example, which is useful and really cool. But before we get to that, I have one last thing that I'd like to talk about with respect to pull requests. And that is, what happens if you maybe don't contribute right away? Maybe you fork something and you're trying to figure out how to contribute, and in the meantime, the original repository keeps getting updated. And that's a very common thing to have happen, especially on a common repository. I know some GitHub repositories out there accept on the order of hundreds of pull requests per day. So you definitely have to figure out a way to keep your repository up to date so that you don't conflict with something that somebody else has done. You might, I'm not sure if you've run into this in previous Commitmas episodes, but one of the worst problems to have in working with Git is the merge conflict. And the longer you're out of date with the upstream repository, the more likely that this will happen. So you want to make things easy on the project maintainers because, again, they're dealing with a lot of activity. You want to make your contribution very palatable for them. And one of the ways to do that is make sure you're up to date, and in so doing, make sure that there's less likelihood for that kind of conflict. So I'm going to log into a virtual machine that I have set up. This is actually the FatAdmin let's say administration PC, so he has the ability, he or she has the ability to contribute to this project directly. That's actually what we're going to do. So let's do git clone, git at github.com, and again, I don't want to go over the fork. I actually want to push code directly to this because I'm just using this as an example. The admin knows of something that he or she wants to fix, so he or she's pushing a change directly. We'll do gov, and we're going to do / mega awesome.git, cloning into mega awesome, cd mega awesome, vi readme, and we are going to add, this is a very important line, and I'll comment it out so we don't dirty up the repo screen. Okay, so just to have an example change. Again, git status, looks like we've made a change. Git add readme, git commit sign off, an inline message updated with absolutely crucial comment. Could not survive without it. Git push origin master. Notice that we're not doing the pull request. We are the admin. We know if something needs to get fixed. For whatever reason, we're just pushing a change. Now, this is obviously very discouraged. Most project maintainers won't do this. What they'll do is they'll actually open up a fork and a pull request themselves, because most of the time they're not logged in as the organization. That's not really a thing, actually. So they want to keep things as transparent as possible. But for the sake of the example, we're doing this just to make things quick. So if we go back to our fork, which I haven't deleted, it still exists. Let's see, yeah, Myriad Mega Awesome, and I refresh. You'll see this branch is 2 commits behind fat gopher master. Now that's very interesting. What does it mean by 2 commits? We just made 1. So why is it saying 2? Well, actually, the one that we just made is one of those commits for sure. But there's actually another commit that happens when you consider what a pull request does. We actually made a commit in our fork, and that commit got pushed up to our fork, to the remote here in GitHub, the Myriad/Mega Awesome. And when we did the pull request, 2 things happened. First off, the commit itself was pulled over into that repository. That actually happened when the pull request was opened. So by opening a pull request, you're already pushing something into the upstream repository. But it just isn't merged yet. So by merging a pull request, you're actually, behind the scenes, GitHub actually does another commit, which merges those changes into master. And so there's a second commit that happens that we don't even see. And that's why it says this branch is 2 commits behind fat gopher master. So what we need to do is pull not only the changes that fat admin made, but we also need to pull in the change that happened when GitHub did the merge. We need to make sure that both of those changes are in our local fork if we want to make subsequent changes on our fork. So how do we do this? Well, again, we're working with our local repository here. This is where we made our last change, the one that fixed the test requirements file. Let's look quickly at our remote configuration. Again, a git remote is just a remote repository that we could push or pull from. If we do git remote -v, you'll see that our origin is set up. Now, this is automatically done as part of the clone. But we can actually add one. And it can work independently and in parallel from our existing one. Let's add one here. Git remote remove, or add, sorry. Git remote add. We're going to name it something. We'll call it upstream. It's a very common nomenclature for this kind of thing. We're going to say the URL git at github.com. We're actually going to say fat gopher, which is the upstream repository, /mega awesome.git. We do a git remote. We can see that both are now in our configuration for both fetches and pushes. Now, all we need to do at this point is say, hey, I actually want to do a git pull, but instead of pulling from origin, I actually want to pull from upstream, because again, there are 2 commits in upstream that we do not have. And I want to merge those changes into master, because again, a pull does 2 things. It does a fetch and it does a merge. So we need to specify what local branch merges into. And there we go. Looks like we've pulled from upstream and we've got our 2 commits. Under the fast forward message here, you can see that the one-liner change to README has been there, and it looks like we've also added that merge. We can even see this if we do git log. Keep typing long. One line. You can see that the comment or the commit that our admin made, which is updated with absolutely crucial comment, is here. We also see merge pull request number 4 from Myriad master. You didn't see me type this in, and that's because GitHub did this commit itself. Again, this is part of the automated workflow of a pull request. All happens behind the scenes, behind that shiny, pretty GUI that GitHub offers. Okay, so that is forking and pull requests in a nutshell. Any questions up until this point? And Lauren, I would ask if you think it's useful for me to go through my one last example, if we have time to do that.
Hey, no questions so far, but yeah, I mean, feel free to keep going if you have the time.
Yeah, it shouldn't take too much longer. I put this in here because I saw a blog post from Matthew Brender recently, and I found it to be extremely useful. So I wanted to demonstrate how that's actually done.
Oh, not that guy. Just
yeah. No, it's really cool. So I came across, and there are ways to do this other than this example. In fact, I've done this for a long time. But when I saw this example, it made things a lot easier for this particular part of the workflow. I'll give you an example. Most of the time, the CI system, we're using Travis CI right now. What that does is it says, hey, I'm gonna perform a build automatically behind the scenes. You don't have to do this. I'm going to run through all of the automated tests and automated code analysis to make sure that all changes that come into this repository are valid and won't break our project. However, there are times when the maintainers of a project need to check out a very specific contribution before allowing it to merge, even if the CI has already run. For instance, if it's failing, we want to check out that particular pull request and run some additional tests on it without making changes to our CI. We want to do that kind of manually as sort of a point in time. Alternatively, maybe the CI actually is passing, but we still want to check something out just in case because we've identified an issue where the CI isn't configured correctly, and we want to make sure that a certain pull request doesn't exploit that change for whatever reason. These things come up. In essence, what we're asking for is we want to be able, as maintainers, we want to be able to download a pull request. We actually want to download a pull request locally and test it without changing anything about our local repository or our upstream. We don't want to merge anything. We don't want to close out any issues. We don't want to change anything. We just want to download what the person who contributed has been doing and test it ourselves as if we were that person. This is a very common thing for maintainers to do. Now, normally what I've done is simply do a clone of that person's fork and check out their branch or their commit that they're working on. And that's a very valid way to do that. But what that does is it requires that I have a second repository set up for just that purpose. It saves a lot of time and it actually makes things a lot cleaner, especially if you're working with a lot of projects at once. If you can do all of those things, checking out that remote PR in the same repository that manages the primary repository, so you can keep things all sort of in one folder. And this example that Matt Breder pointed out, which is actually originally opened up as a GitHub issue, allows us to do just that. So try to watch carefully what I do. I'm actually going to get into the Git config. Scroll down on my notes. Okay, so let's do something interesting. So we're still logged in as me. We're still logged in as Mirda. I'm going to be mischievous. I'm going to make a change to the actual Python here. And I'm going to take these two lines out. And I'm even going to add some additional stuff. Let's see. I'm going to add a comment with no spaces, and I'm going to make it go way beyond 80 characters, which is the limit. So as you can see, my local linter in Sublime Text is freaking out because the spacing is wrong. This line has multiple problems with it. For instance, it should start with a space, and it certainly shouldn't exceed 80. So I've done a very bad thing. Now, of course, the project itself isn't broken because the code's still there, but I've done a bad thing from the perspective of this project does not conform to the standard for how code should look, for how Python specifically should look. I've violated several of those rules. And I, as a totally lazy and inept person, I'm just simply going to create a PR with those changes because I can't be bothered to test them out. Git status, mega awesome core.py, git add, mega awesome, git commit. This will work. This will definitely work. Don't even look at it. Git push origin, and just to be sure, because I'm obsessive this way. Okay, yes, we've configured the remotes correctly. Git push origin master. And finally, if we refresh, you'll see that we are hopefully one commit ahead. Yep, there we go, one commit ahead. Let's open a new pull request. It says able to merge, everything's fine. I'm going to create a pull request, and life is good.
We do have a question when you have a second, Matt.
Actually, now would be a perfect time for that because I want the build to finish before I move on.
Awesome. Okay, so for the command git pull upstream master, upstream is the Fat Gopher repo and master is the Mirden repo. Is that right?
No, actually, the first keyword that you said there, the upstream keyword, that's actually the name of the remote. I'll go into my terminal. So we go to, actually, I'll highlight it here. These are the two remotes that I've configured, origin and upstream. So upstream is Fat Gopher Mega Awesome, and then origin is Mirden Mega Awesome. So this is the fork. Origin is the fork. And this is like I said, this is a very common convention for doing this. A lot of times origin refers to the one that you're pushing to, and then upstream refers to the one that you probably don't want to push to. It's just something that you want to pull from. So when I say git pull, what I'm doing first is I'm saying which remote do I want to pull from. I can't pull from both. I got to pull from one at a time. So I'm going to do upstream. And then again, a pull is an alias for two git commands. A pull does two things. It does a fetch, which says I want the code that's in the remote to be pulled down to my local repository. And that doesn't mean it's in your branch. It doesn't mean it's in master. It just means it's locally pulled into your local repository. That's all that means. The next command, or the next argument, is the branch that you want to merge to, because the pull does a second command. It first does a fetch, but it also does a merge. And what it'll do is it'll merge into your local branch. And that's why you have to specify the branch there. If we wanted to merge with a different branch, we would say like branch 1, something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, cool. Okay, our Travis CI build has failed. Oh my goodness, why did that happen? I have no idea what could have possibly gone wrong. Oh wait, we did something bad here. Oh boy, the maintainers are going to be really angry with me. Oh my goodness, I'm so embarrassed. Okay, well, maybe I'm not embarrassed because again, I'm a lazy person, I'm not even looking. So this is a real fire and forget contribution. We'll say that. Let's go over to our admin. Our admin logs in, gets her coffee in the morning, and says, okay, we're going to sit down and look at this. Let's see. What is this? What's going on? Oh, come on. You've got to be kidding me. What is this? What even is this? Okay, so hopefully if you're a maintainer of a project, don't be this mean, but I'm illustrating something here. So the checks have failed. We want to know why it's failed. Now, of course, we could go into Travis CI. That's a very valid way of doing this. But let's use the example that I want to point out here. Let's go into our terminal, because again, we are the admin. We have our own terminal here. We have something that we can work with. Note that we do not have a git remote set up for the fork, because we don't really care about the fork. There's probably hundreds of forks for this project because we're running a really popular project. So we want to deal with just this repository. Again, we don't want to clone and make a separate copy. We want to keep things simple, keep things just this one remote. We also don't want to add another remote and do all of that nonsense. We want to keep things simple. So how do we fix this? How can we check out the contents of this PR so that we can run things locally? Well, a great way to do that is by editing the git config file.
Hey, Matt, you still there? Hey, we just lost you for...
Still there? I didn't lose the total network.
Yeah, just lost you for like 10 seconds.
Oh, that's weird. Oh, shoot. Hey, my Thunderbolt connector for my Ethernet port was a little loose. I just plugged it back in. I'm assuming you're still there.
Yep, we're here.
Okay. All right. That could have gone a lot worse. Okay. Woo. Anyway, let's actually go back. Thank you. So yeah, Mosh, if you haven't seen Mosh is amazing. I don't know why I just lost faith in it briefly, because this is exactly what it's supposed to do. Mosh is a way of keeping SSH connections persistently, so I don't need to break or relog in. So yeah, Mosh. Anyway, we're going to go to the next line. We're actually going to add a second line here for fetch. And I'll type it in. I'm not going to do that. That's silly. This is a live demo. I'm going to copy and paste this from my notes because I know they work. And I'm going to save it. Before I do that, though, I want to mention, don't worry about the details of this. This is all contained in the blog post, and there's actually several articles out there that talk about this. If you want to look at what this is, it's actually called a ref spec. So as you're going down your Google Foo, search for that, ref spec, R-E-F-S-P-E-C. Basically what this is doing is it's adding an alias for us that allows us to pull down something that we are looking for in another repository, but we want to remap it to a usable sort of name so that it's easier to check out. That's all this really does. All right, so we've saved that. We're going to do a git fetch. It looks like we've pulled quite a few things down here. Let's go over to actually Safari, where we're logged in as admin, and I'm going to copy, or at least look at the number of this this pull request. It's actually a 5. So based on the alias, what this allows us to do is git checkout PR/5. Now, what this does is it allows us to actually check out the instance of the repository as it stands with the pull request. So this really gives us a little bit of insight into actually what's happening in a pull request. As I mentioned, at the very beginning, when you even open the pull request, we haven't even merged the pull request yet, and nor will we because it's fundamentally broken. But we haven't merged the pull request yet. However, the change is already part of the repository. So it tells us a lot about how GitHub does its workflow in the back end. What I mean by that is, yes, it's not part of master. Yes, it's not part of what normal people will see when they log into the GitHub GUI and click on master and try to download the code and work with it. But it's still part of the repo on a separate sort of branch on the remote side. And we can actually download that. We can fetch that down and check it out locally because we know where it's at. And just to prove that that's what we've done, I'm actually going to go into Mega Awesome, not tests. Yeah, that's what I thought. Ooh, less Mega Awesome, core PY, and there is our insane line. So we have not even merged this pull request. We also haven't checked out. We haven't added a remote. We haven't done anything that otherwise indicates that we've tried to access the fork. We're still on the primary repository as the admin of the project. However, by adding that little line in our git config, we can use one command, or rather two, git fetch, and then git checkout pull request number 5 to check out that pull request locally, and we can even go so far as to rerun tops, just to make sure that Travis and my VM are seeing the exact same thing. Now, will you need to do this as a contributor to a project? More than likely not. But I show this for 2 reasons. First off, I think it's important that everybody at least aspire to maintain a project, even if it's not a huge project like OpenStack or something out there that's getting all the press. There's a lot to be learned by just maintaining a little library or some sort of a small command line tool that solves a very simple problem. No one has made it a rule that says in order to contribute to a project, it must be a huge project. I want to encourage you to think of really interesting alternatives to that idea. Now, is it really cool to get your pull requests submitted or pulled into Docker or into Open Daylight or into OpenStack? You betcha. But don't just assume that's what you have to do. If you want to cut your teeth on something small, I would start there. With that, I am finished with the live demo. Lauren, where are we at?
I think we're all set. I think people are digesting all the material. A lot covered tonight, but it was fantastic as always.
Cool. Well, anyway, just to let you guys know, I am online as Meerden. I think the first slide that you have, Lauren, misspelled my Twitter handle, so I'll bring that up here on the screen, just in case anybody wants to get in touch with me. I have an email address. I could give that out, but that's the best way to not get in touch with me because my backlog is currently ridiculous. So this is the best method.
Awesome. So at Meerden, Mierdin. Thanks so much, Matt. That was terrific. Really appreciate you hosting tonight.
Yeah, no, it was my pleasure. You know, like I said, it's fun to be involved with this stuff. It's a passion of mine. So again, if you have any questions, just reach out. I'm happy to do it.
All right, very cool. Well, it doesn't look like we have any questions, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.